The BA podcast is back with a brand new series of webinars and podcasts. Each podcast will follow up on a preceding webinar and is not simply a rehash of the subject, but a deeper dive into some of the topics we'll be covering. In this episode, we're following up from the webinar Quick Wins to Improve Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in Your Business, where we were joined by Gemma Lloyd, the co-founder and co-CEO of Work180.
You're listening to the BA podcast.
Today, I'm back with Sally Middlemiss, the project lead for the Bicycle Association's Diversity in the Cycling Industry work and the author of the Bicycle Association's report, Diversity in the Cycling Industry. To help us dive into this topic, we are joined by Isla Rowntree, a former professional cyclist. Isla formed Isla Bikes in 2006, first as a company designing bikes for young people. The mission has gradually evolved to include a wide range of bikes designed to help more people cycle. Together with Bianca Carlin, a HR professional with a background in food and drink, cosmetics and the consumer finance sectors, Bianca has been with WiggleCRC since 2017 and is the Group HR Director. So a very warm welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we go back to the webinar, there was an awful lot of information that was covered in that. Gemma managed to go through it really succinctly, but there were a couple of things that have really sort of stuck with me. First was that, and she said it a number of times, that diversity, equity and inclusion is a marathon. Whilst the title of the webinar and the podcast may be a little bit misleading with quick wins, she stressed, and it's been stressed a number of times, that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And whilst there are things that you can do relatively quickly, there isn't a quick fix to this. But there was another point that she made really early on, and it struck me and has stuck with me. And I wanted to just play it now really quickly.
The first thing is, are you a good place to work? Do women in marginalised communities actually want to work for your company?
It was such a simple question, and she said it very early on in the webinar, but it stuck with me. And I was just wondering, Sally, what were your thoughts on that question? Is the bicycle industry a good place to work?
Good question. I think the short answer is it depends. What does it mean to be a good place to work? On the face of it, the cycling industry seems like a great place to work. Many of us are working to support a sport or an activity we're passionate about. We're improving people's health, fitness, well-being, reducing emissions, supporting the environment. That all sounds good. But if being a good place to work means having balanced representation, so our industry looks more like the society we live in at all levels, then we're a really long way off today. So the BA's own census data shows that only 8% of workshop-based roles and 19% of customer-facing roles are filled by women. And we don't even have official data yet on other demographics like disability, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background. We just don't have any data yet for those groups, but we know that anecdotally they're significantly underrepresented in the industry, just as they are in terms of their participation in cycling. Why does this matter? Well, if you're a person from one of those marginalised groups, then the simple reality of not seeing many or any other people who look like you might make you feel like you don't entirely belong, that your needs aren't entirely being heard or understood or met. And, that's after you've taken the plunge and joined the industry in the first place. So potentially that might make you more likely to move on and leave the industry altogether. And all of this might be the case, but ultimately I think that if we want to really be able to answer this question, are we a good place to work? If we want to be able to answer that accurately, we need to ask people in the industry to share their experiences, which is what we're doing at the moment with our perception survey. So we're inviting everybody working in the industry, and particularly women and those from marginalised groups, to take part in this survey and share their views and experiences on diversity, equity and inclusion in the workplace. So we can start to really address this question of whether the cycling industry is a good place to work for everybody. And if not, then where do we fall short and what can we do to remedy this so that everybody feels welcome? Because all the research data shows really clearly that in a business context, diversity wins. So diverse businesses are more profitable, they recruit the best talent, they make better decisions, they have more motivated employees, they perform better in a crisis, and they have a superior understanding of customers' needs. One final thing to say on this point, there are definitely pockets of good practice, and some progress is being made in terms of making the industry more inclusive and more representative. For example, among our industry's leaders who are leading from the top, signing the BA's diversity pledge, for example, making those strategic commitments that are vital to drive real change. So, I think and I hope that we're starting to see some momentum, some small acorns of change, to make our industry a better place to work for everyone. But we still have a long way to go. And I hope we can share some practical ideas today that will help companies who are keen to be part of this change and who are looking for some guidance as to go about doing it.
Sally, thank you for that. Isla, if I can switch to you, and I'm going to put a slight nuance on this. Obviously, Isla Bikes is coming up to 20 years old as a brand, but obviously your connections with the cycling industry predate that as a professional cyclist and as a passionate cyclist even before that. How is the industry a good place to be in today? Has it changed?
I support everything that Sally says. And has it changed over the time I've been involved? I started working in a bike shop when I was 15 or 16 on Saturdays. That's a long time ago. I'm in my mid-50s now. Yes, it has changed. But as Sally said, it's still got a long, long way to go. And I've still recently attended Shimano new product launches and been the only female in the room of sort of 40 or 50, 60 product managers across the British cycle industry. So it is improving. I think there's an appetite for change, and I think the initiative that the BA have undertaken is great, because I think we can now start to provide some practical guidance for businesses so that they can turn that appetite and that good intention into active change. And it is a marathon. It's a long way, but we've never had anything like the support. And I think what the BA are doing is providing the information that that will allow people to turn that good intention into something real, because actually it's really hard to have a clue where to start.
Bianca, I'm going to turn to you. The most recent person to join the cycling industry from Sally and Isla's perspective as a guest, and somebody who doesn't have an obvious background in cycling. Was the cycling industry a good place to join? Is it a good place to be working?
Well, again, I echo some of the stuff that Sally said. I think she summed it up beautifully around kind of where the industry is at the moment. If I talk from my perspective, from the organisation that I'm part of the Wiggles Chain Reaction Group, we actually have a pretty good gender split now. We could do better at a senior level, but actually across the business, it's fairly representative of both those groups. We could do better at some of the other sectors that Sally mentioned. But as an organisation, we're kind of made up, and I think this is not just in the organisation I'm part of, but it's a really passionate bunch of people about what they do, about the sports they're part of, the communities they operate within, and those communities that they represent. So that doesn't mean that we're always getting it right. It does mean that we've still got kind of a long way to go on our journey, but actually there's a real focus on it. For us, it sits as one of our priorities, as right at the top. It's set as a business objective as part of our Powering Better campaign. So it depends, like Sally said, it depends on kind of the question you're asking and kind of the answer you're looking for in what context. So there's a lot more work to be done, but I think it's a great place to work. It's forward thinking, it's agile, it's full of people who have, they take social responsibility, heavily on their own shoulders, and they want to make a difference, whether that might be to our carbon footprint or supporting underrepresented groups. So yes, we do have a long way to go, but on the main part, we've got a lot of people who want to make a difference, and they want to be part of that journey, which I think is inspiring to be part of, right?
Yeah, I might actually circle back to that point a little bit later on, but just for now, I'm going to move it on and say, and ask Sally, what were your key takeaways from the webinar?
Yeah, I think my my first key takeaway was those 10 equity standards that Gemma shared with us. She gave us a really good roadmap, I think, of what good looks like for diversity, equity and inclusion in the workplace. We've actually used these now to create a downloadable 10-step action plan, which you can access freely from the BA's website. So that was my first key takeaway. I think the second was around the structure and language of job ads. Gemma shared some really interesting insights around masculine and feminine coded language, which can be off-putting to some women. So can we hear Gemma's advice?
Yeah, I've got the clip here. So
all of the research shows that masculine job ads deter women from applying, but they do not deter men. But feminine coded job ads do not deter men or women. So it's better to make your job ads more feminine coded. So you can do that with by understanding what words are more feminine and what words are more masculine.
Isla, I understand you worked really hard to make the language of your job ads more attractive to women in particular. Could you talk us through what you did and what impact that had?
Yes, this was a real revelation to me years ago when I discovered that the wording in the ads were putting people off applying, or even considering that the advert was meant for them. And the subconscious bias that we've all grown up with is what's at play here. Now, I think the way that Gemma phrased it was a huge step forward from our understanding at Isla Bikes when we embarked on this work. And I should say as an aside that it was actually two colleagues of mine that really led and drove this work. So they were the people that actually introduced me to this idea. So I was the employer that was saying, well, we've put a job advert out there and 46 people have applied and 45 of them are men. How can I recruit more women? And my colleagues challenged me and said, actually, it's the language that we're using in the job ads that we need to change. So I hadn't come across the idea of the feminine coded words, as Gemma explained last week. That was new to me and so easy to understand and beautifully put by her, I thought. But yes, so including in our adverts for operational roles and workshop roles, you're not including in the headline words mechanic or workshop, because as women, even though we're not thinking consciously, we can't do that. Subconsciously, we've been taught that's not for us. And so right at the start with the name of the job, the job title, we're potentially putting off a whole raft of applicants. And that was revelatory for us as a business, and really working on that detail in every single line of the job advert, including the title of the job, made a big difference to the applications we were getting. And of course, you have to have the applications representative of more diversity before you even get into the recruitment process to be able to have the chance to change the mix of your organisation.
Exactly. And I know, anecdotally, that is something that a lot of the companies I've spoken to have mentioned as a pain point. As you say, they're really keen to do something. They've got an appetite for change, but they find that they are struggling to receive enough applications, just as you were. So how did you did you use this gender decoding online tool that Gemma mentioned to tweak your language in your job?
No, we didn't. I don't even know if they were available then. So when we embarked on this work, it's a good few years ago now. So it felt like we were sort of groping around in the dark a lot of the time with it. But once we understood this concept, we did a lot of internal work, and my colleagues did their research to endeavour to change the language. But no, we weren't aware. I'm pretty sure there wouldn't have been those tools available at that time. And I'm not. I've been out of the business for a couple of years now, so I'm not involved in the detail of what they do now. I've certainly shared the fact that the tools are available with my colleagues now. But I think that having a tool like that, it just makes it so much easier, because this stuff's hard work, and sitting there thinking, is this word the right word to use? Is that one? Is really hard work. Having a tool to use is huge. And if we're looking for quick wins, and as we've already said in the introduction, and Gemma said, this isn't quick. But if there's one thing that you could change, it is to run a job advert through those tools. That's a great first step.
Yes, and the keywords that she told us to search for were gender decoding job ad tool, and I have tried that myself, and it does bring up lots of free tools to use. So, what impact did that have, Isla? Changing the language in your job ads?
It changed the mixture of the people that initially applied. So it's just the first step. But as my early example, if you get 50 applications and you don't get any applications from anybody other than white males, which is what would typically happen, then you're not going to recruit anybody other than white males. So it significantly changed the makeup of the initial applications that we received for all roles within the organisation, and particularly the more technical roles.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear, that it really does make a difference. Bianca, I wanted to ask you, at Wiggle, how do you go about making your job ads more inclusive?
So we've been on a very similar journey. So we do exactly as you've just been discussing. So we kind of try and make our adverts more representative. And that's not just kind of from a gender perspective, but we try and review the language so it's increased inclusivity for all. We used to, for example, historically use lots of very movement orientated roads. So we talk about coming and joining the ride and coming for a run, but actually again, those languages might isolate somebody from who's part of the disability community. So actually we've taken a lot of that language out. We also add positive diversity statements to all of our adverts. We do have we call it our diversity commitment, which we share externally. So we make sure we link that to all of our adverts so that people can access that to see kind of what we stand for. We've reviewed all of our imagery we use. Again, if you go back when I first started, most of the imagery would be white middle-aged men on bikes. So we've tried to change that now so we represent a much, much wider group. And that hasn't just that's not just restricted to our job ads, right? We do that. The commercial and marketing teams are doing a great job of making a difference on everything the organisation does online. We also started signposting as part of our job ads. So things like, flexible working or parental leave. So again, we might appeal to a wider demographic. So I think that's probably a good summary of what we've done just from a job ad point of view.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for kind of mentioning that wider inclusion picture as well. Do you feel, it sounds like you've been engaged in that work for some time now. Do you feel like over time that can become a sort of mindset then that informs, not just the writing of job ads, but the writing of other kind of content and, organising of events and kind of percolating all the way
absolutely. Through? And don't get me wrong, we're not there yet. I couldn't hold my hand on my heart and say that every corner of the business was thinking in that way. But there definitely has been a step change in the way that you can see some people thinking. So if we're doing comms for the business, certainly all my team who are kind of new to the journey, they'll think about the language they'll use and how we communicate. And from an HR point of view, for example, every policy we do, we have a statement on it about giving us feedback. How can we make it more inclusive? How can we tailor that to kind of appeal to underrepresented groups? So I think you're right. I think it definitely does start to kind of spread its tendrils across the organisation. And certainly there are marketing guidelines now on how you write content, on imagery you use to make sure that it is inclusive.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sorry, Sally, if I could just jump in then. I mean there's a huge amount of information there on the job advert aspect of this, but what other takeaways were there then that built upon that and went further into the recruitment process?
Yeah, I thought Gemma's comments around, she talked about getting distracted when you're conducting an interview and not sticking to the standard script that you're, meant to be working through with all the candidates. If you're interviewing someone who has a similar interest or a passion, I found those comments particularly insightful. I think, that really shines a light on those unconscious biases that might exist through the recruitment process. Can we listen to Gemma and what she said on that point?
Yeah, I can play it now.
Standardized interview formats, criteria and scoring. This is a really big one, which we don't have time to get into today. But whenever we do like a recruitment audit across an organisation for their DEI practices, it's quite often one of the big downfalls is that interviewers are not asking candidates the same questions in the same order. And interviewers often go off script. So if Bill's interviewing John and he realises that Bill and John, we love cycling, and all of a sudden we go down this rabbit hole of cycling conversation and we think, oh, God, he's a great guy. I'd love to have a barbecue with him on the weekend. That derails the whole questioning, and you think he's going to be great for the role because he's like me. So it's really important to make sure it's really sticking to the script and having very specific scoring. And being transparent with the policies and benefits.
No, well, I mean, we talked a little bit about those unconscious biases. How did you feel when you heard that? It obviously resonated.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I've seen that in action as described by Gemma. And what we put in place at Isla Bikes, and I think is really important, is very structured interviews where you know what you're seeking in the role, and that within that particular set of skills or experience, you drill down with specific questions to draw out whether that person is a good match or not, and to have scoring. Gemma mentioned scoring, but to have marking frames where you score each of those individual aspects on a predetermined scale. And we used to fill those all in onto a spreadsheet with, it's getting quite technical, but with minimum hurdles for some of the aspects. And so what you're trying to do is allow for your own biases as an interviewer, and to put as much in place to screen those out, and rather than so that you don't end up recruiting the person you like, which is usually the person that's like me. And that I would really strongly recommend that anybody that's serious about this does the legwork in the interview structure phase when you're planning, and you can once you've got it in place, you can apply it to lots of different roles, but it is a little bit of work up front. Get a proper scoring system and stick to it.
Yeah, thank you. Really great advice there. Bianca, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just echoing really what has been said. We have fairly structured questions from a competency base that we've preset for the levels across our business that sit in line with our values. So we've got predetermined values that we define kind of who we are and our culture, and the questions are structured around those. So they do, they cover a wide spectrum, and then for each role, accompanying those would be a set of technical questions which each candidate gets asked. And then we're very fortunate that we have a system now which we can all that data gets inputted from, so you can run reports and look at trends, and you can it's a relatively new system, but aspirationally you'd be able to then plot the application. Each applicant would put kind of their data, their information about their background and kind of which communities they're part of, and then you can almost track that around how questions are answered, which candidates are successful, which is really exciting, because actually, I mean, I get very excited about data, but actually it can give you really clear trends and pathways, and allow us to kind of pick things apart and see where we can make improvements, because that's ultimately kind of what we're hoping that the data will allow us to do.
Wow, I didn't even know that those systems existed. Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, and I think it really sounds like a really robust way maybe to break down some of those unconscious biases that even with scoring and spreadsheets and so on, potentially even then might creep in. So that sounds like it's kind of taking that concept one step further, doesn't it? Really interesting.
Well, and eventually kind of I'm hoping we'll be able to look at the trends of all our applicants, and then the kind of the spread of demographic we have within the business, and you'll be able to compare. Actually, I don't know, we do have a really diverse set of applications, but for whatever reason they're not making it into the business, and where is the blocker in the process to kind of help us identify that and make sure we can remove those blockers, whether that's blockers we're creating ourselves or blockers we don't know we're making, that the candidates are feeling. I don't, it would be interesting to flush some of that data out and that information out, so we can do better for everyone.
This was one of the areas that, as we were talking about the podcast, that really struck me as well. Not as somebody who's done recruitment, as somebody who's gone through recruiting processes. I've always looked for those connections as somebody going through the recruiting process, that coming out, and whether you would think that interview went well or it went badly, part of that for me would be I felt I made a connection with the people who were asking, and that might have been a shared interest or whatever. And I always thought that was a really positive thing. And certainly for me as an individual, it was. But looking at it the other way, how does this affect people who haven't been able to make that connection for whatever reason? It was one of those, I think, getting back to what Isla said, hadn't thought about how language could be gender biased, and when you suddenly realise that it's a light switch moment. This for me was one of those light switch moments, and certainly as an individual, I've always sought that connection, and came out feeling really optimistic when I've had it, and so seeing it from the other perspective is a real changer.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think connections are good, aren't they? And Bianca talked about the values, and looking for candidates who kind of match the company's overall values, and all of that's good. We just need to be really careful that we are giving everybody a fair chance. And so, where there is a script and a standard kind of interview process to follow and scoring, we must do everything that we can, as Ida said, to kind of strip out those biases as much as possible and make sure that we're giving everybody a really fair,
and I think
chance.
Sorry to jump in on understanding those biases, that the people that display the biases may also have minority characteristics. We're all subject to the same conditioning as babies and children and growing up, and so it's not necessarily just the straight white male that exhibits those biases or unconscious discriminations. It's people in the minority characteristic groups as well, because we're all subject to the same conditioning. So we can unconsciously disadvantage ourselves if we've got minority characteristics because of that same conditioning. So it's a really complex topic that takes a lot of unraveling, and I think you have to be ever vigilant within an organisation to see where it's cropping up and how that might be putting people off or disadvantaging people. And I think it was interesting that Bianca talked about the other departments and the marketing departments, and just things like the representation in pictures, and not just who's represented, but what they're doing. And we had an incident very recently at Isla Bikes where a product was represented with 3 photographs: man riding the bike, man and woman standing with the bike, man riding a bike, in that order. Now, doesn't so 3 pictures contain the man, 1 picture contained the woman, and the picture that contained the woman, she wasn't actually riding the bike. Now, that slipped through our net, and it was me that picked it up, and it was 3 lovely, really well intentioned, right on men that had subconsciously made that decision to put those photographs in that order. And it's that really subtle stuff that is sending out signals that people don't even necessarily know that they're receiving, that can change the way you feel about an organisation, about you feel about an activity, feel about whether you want to be a part of it. So it's a complex topic that we will be forever learning about if we want to try and do better.
So if I just say as well, in relation to the point about the connections in an interview, I really strongly believe that all this work that we're all doing to try and make these processes fairer and more inclusive, you you don't want to use that as you don't want it to become kind of like a cage that your managers sit within, too afraid to get things wrong or say the wrong thing, because then you lose the heart and the soul of the business at the same time. So for us on this unconscious topic, yes, we've got a structure, but we still allow some personality come through, and the stuff we just talked around about culture, but actually we've coupled kind of all that good work with training and development on different approaches and learning from different people to try and open people's hearts and minds to the things that's happening under the bonnet that they're not aware that they've been doing for some time, but you definitely still want those connections to happen, because you're right that's when you win people, isn't it, in the interview process, when they really connect with the organisation rather than necessarily a person. So you definitely don't want to lose those bits. Just back to your original point.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree. That's it's really important. Actually, that links nicely to another interesting takeaway for me, which was Gemma talked about the power of storytelling. I think she said facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered if they're part of a story. And according to Gemma, she said, stories have the potential to increase the number of women in marginalised communities applying for a job by up to 600%. And so I think that links quite well, doesn't it, with those connections you were talking about, Bianca. Can we listen to what Gemma said on that point, Alec?
And we've spoken a bit about the importance of transparency of policies. And now it's how do you bring those policies to life through storytelling? Storytelling is really important. And so quite often what works really well is when you interview people at your company, whether it be by video or you're interviewing them to write a blog, for example, and then sharing that video or that blog across your website, on your social media channels, because that helps bring to life why someone should work for you. And with storytelling, research has shown that facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered when they feature as part of a story. People that might not have considered your organisation in the past. Through storytelling, we see on average an increase of women in marginalised communities applying to roles by 52%, and sometimes up to 600% through sharing a story.
So I was keen to get your thoughts on the storytelling technique. Maybe start with Bianca. Is this something that you have tried or would like to try?
Something we've been looking at. So last year we did quite a lot of speaker events internally, so not necessarily relating specifically to the recruitment process, but we had speakers who gave insights around women in business, disability, sexual orientation and race, just among others, and we did some awareness events again where we looked at gender identities, neurodiversity, and we had speakers who kind of represented these groups come in and talk to our employees, which I think was quite powerful, and there was some real kind of hearts and minds changing moments, and they might have only been small groups, but actually it was really as someone who was leading the group with a couple of my team, they were quite inspiring moments when you heard people across the business speaking up for the first time. And then if linking into the recruitment point of view, yes, we've also, one thing we've done is launched a career pathway plan, and as part of that we've talked about people who within the business have been able to showcase the journeys that they've been on and successfully moved around the business. But something we want to do better actually on our external website is to show stories about people within the business, do that better externally, so we can show a bit like we just heard on the clip. We can showcase people within the business doing the jobs, what they love about it, and why it's working for them, and also perhaps showcasing people who've been able to use some of our policies, like flexible working or maternity leave, so we can actually talk about how that's a priority to us and kind of the strengths and the kind of the importance we give to those policies. So there's a bit of success we've had, and there's a bit of an area that we know we need to do better at, that we're working on as we speak actually. So that'll be coming soon to our websites.
Sounds like you've done a lot already. I'd love to hear how that goes. Isla, What are your thoughts on this storytelling technique?
A really powerful statistic. We haven't done anything as formal as described, and I think what Bianca says is something that we can have a look at doing. All we've done, which is just scratching the surface of the storytelling, is making sure in all of our photographs of people at Isla Bikes that we're representing diversity in those. So wherever those are going out, particularly in the working roles and in the photographs that support job adverts. And then when we have got people in for interview, we quite often take them around other people in the role, type of role that they're being interviewed for, and get them to tell their stories one-to-one to people as part of an interview, which is also been really helpful, so that they get a less formal chat with somebody doing the role, and again, ideally those people would be representing diversity in those roles. Oh yeah, so they tell their own stories on a one-to-one basis.
Yes, that sounds like a really, I mean, storytelling in the flesh, you know, that sounds really powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Sort of change the direction a little bit, because obviously we've spoken an awful lot about the recruitment process. How do we bring more people into the cycling industry? But not everybody can recruit their way to greater diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Smaller operations, which maybe only one or two people and aren't looking to grow. What can we be doing in our organisations, no matter how large or small they are, and across the industry more broadly, to be the change, to create that culture of inclusion that we want to see?
May I jump in there,
Yeah,
Ali?
of course.
Yeah. One of the things that Isla Bikes started doing well over 10 years ago was annual diversity, equity and inclusion training for everybody every year. And you can do that regardless of the size of your organisation. And it's been really striking over the years that the providers of that, which have changed, although we generally have an ongoing relationship with one firm now, say that we are the only business on their books that invites them in annually. Everybody else that they go to do DEI training with does it in response to a crisis, so in response to something that's gone wrong, where they've had a bad incident at work, and they feel that they need to mitigate for that. And it's not the way round that it needs to be done. And that training has been very discussive and inclusive, and in medium-sized groups, maybe 8 people in a group throughout the organisation. And the way that it's led by our current provider is they start out by getting every individual in the group to share a story where they've been discriminated against. And it's really interesting that even if somebody apparently doesn't have any minority characteristics, so let's take the white male, that we have still all got a story about ourselves. So ones that I can bring to mind are being discriminated against because of regional accent, being discriminated against because an adult male looks very young, even whether he is or not, just has young looking characteristics, somebody who's unusually tall. And they've experienced either teasing, so-called joking, harassment, maybe at low level, or active discrimination because of those things. And in discussing those in a group, within a workplace, with each other, it promotes understanding of how people with different characteristics may feel. And that has been so powerful for us. And those conversations then continue outside of the training and become embedded in the culture. So you actually are then changing the mindset of an organisation over time, and you'll get champions within your groups that gently call out and correct colleagues, just on an informal basis in the workplace without less formal follow up as a result of that training. And that's something that I think even if you're a two-person organization, is really valuable to do. And that will change how you interact with your customers, you interact with your suppliers in a way that you're more likely to make more people feel welcome. And if there's one thing that I'd suggest outside of the recruitment thing that organisations did, it is to do that.
How you interact with customers. Obviously, Gemma gave us that example of feedback that had been had within the cycling industry of somebody who sort of converted to online because their experience of going into stores was that negative. That training is beyond just the workplace and how you interact with colleagues. It's how the industry interacts with their customer base as well, which is crucial for growth. Bianca, I'd like to ask you the same question. I just want to reflect back on something that you said right at the very beginning of this podcast, that you've got people who are joining who are already quite conscious about social issues, who are coming to you, who are invigorated, and are enthusiastic about making changes. And so I just wonder whether that's something that you might be able to talk to as well in this question.
Yeah, so I think from making the difference, I guess you were talking about, weren't you, in the original question? I don't think there is, sadly, there's not a tick list somewhere that you can check off to say, oh, we've done these 5 things, there we go, we've done. It's kind of an ever-evolving task, and I guess something that you'll never really finish, because there's always something you can do to make things better. So I think it's a real collaboration of tasks. The stuff that we just talked about, the training is invaluable. So we've done training for managers or different kinds of sessions. I talked about earlier about doing the sessions with speakers, with people bringing different insights. We've got a leadership program launching later this year, and as part of that, it's got inclusive leadership in it. We're doing something for managers later in the year, which will again have inclusive leadership in it. We celebrate a diversity week. We have a D&I and a wellbeing calendar for the whole year where we talk about different topics. We make sure all of our policies are in line with kind of inclusivity and unconscious bias, and just from a formal perspective, give a clear guideline on how people, how they can deal with topics if they don't feel they can talk to their manager about it. So there's clear standards set. We've done things like we've audited our physical and virtual working space for inclusivity to, for example, when you're on a Teams call, how can you make that more inclusive? Or how to our entry to our sites, how can we make that more inclusive? So, the list is kind of endless of things that you can do. I think one of the points was really important about it needs to start from the top. So for me, it's really important that the rest of the exec team and my CEO are on board. And as I mentioned earlier, it forms part of our wider kind of ESG campaign, which is Powering Better. So, it's right up there at the top. So it starts from the top and everyone is passionate about it. We are fortunate, and like I say, and I am helped, that even before we started this diversity campaign, which goes back to your other point, there were loads of people across the business already doing their own thing. So lots of stuff that was amazing that was happening across the business that we've been able to fit into our diversity commitment. That was just happening naturally because people care about these sorts of topics, which is really, really wonderful. And it means that people like me are learning from different people across the business, all the time. So yes, I guess we're very fortunate in that from that event. And don't get me wrong, it's not everybody, but we do have a group of people that are amazing at kind of challenging the way we all think all the time. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, actually, but I just want to pick up one point that you made there, that whilst diversity, equity and inclusion is always on the calendar, that you have you've set aside, I think you said it was a week, a diversity week.
Yeah.
Is that aligned to something national, or is it just something that you've put a marker in the calendar and said, we're really going to make a focus here on this week, and this is something that we'll do within WiggleCRC?
I think there is a diversity week, but our diversity week moves from a business point of view, so we don't align it with anything external. So it's something that we champion. We also have a wellbeing week as well for a different week, so it's not the only thing we focus on across the year. But yeah, we have a week where we'll have focused activity where we can, we'll have, like I say, we'll have speakers in, we'll have different kind of leaders across the business who've perhaps led a project, and we'll ask them to come and talk about it. So that's something we just do ourselves. I should really give credit. I've got a couple of ladies in my team. I can't take credit for all this amazing work. I've got two ladies, Catherine and Kerry, in my team who lead the talent and the other diversity projects. So I'm here talking passionately about it, but I really can't claim all the credit for all this amazing work because it really hasn't all been me.
Well, thank you, Bianca, and thank you also, Isla, for sharing so many insights and experiences. I feel like, as Alex said, there were some light bulb moments in Gemma's webinar, and we learned so much from that. And I feel like we've moved forward again in our learning today, and I've taken away so many great ideas and advice. So thank you to you both for sharing all of that. So, to sum up then, and bearing in mind, if we go all the way back to Gemma's initial comments about diversity, equity and inclusion being a marathon and not a sprint. I think you echoed that, Bianca, when you said it, there's no quick tick list, and that the task never ends really, because there's always more to be done. So, to sum up, what are your key learnings so far? Is there one piece of advice you could share with us particularly for a company that might be taking its first steps in this area? Isla?
Yeah, I think it's easy to be daunted. And I think it's fantastic that an organisation with the scale that Wiggle has got and is able to do the work that Bianca has described. And I'm thinking of the small bike shop, what do they do? And I think it's to tap into the work that the BA are doing and use that as a guide, so that you don't have to do all the upfront working out what to do. You can just follow the steps and get on with the doing, because the hard bit is actually working out what to do. And I think that's where the BA work, this piece of work, has so much value, because actually you can just get on and follow the steps. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Bianca?
Yeah, I guess something similar. I mean, we might be big, but right at the beginning, we were just as daunted as a small bike shop, like you say. So I think the advice would be to take the first step, even if it is scary, and you won't get everything right. But if you don't start, it's just that first step is the hardest one. And in our experience, we find that people don't actually mind if you get it wrong, as long as you're open to feedback and you listen to it, and then you respond and make changes as necessary. But I think once you're on the journey, it kind of gathers speed and momentum, and people kind of jump on the wagon with you, and they can help you and guide you. So it's just take the first step. Don't be afraid of making a mistake or getting everything perfect.
Yeah, it's really valuable advice. I think, as Gemma said, it's progress, not perfection.
Yeah, I loved that actually. I wrote that one down. Progress, not perfection. I think it's definitely a really, really good way of looking at it. Yeah.
I'm afraid that is all we have time for in this episode of the Bicycle Association's podcast. I'd like to say a special thank you to Isla and Bianca for sharing your experiences and insight with us. And Sally, thank you for co-hosting both the webinar and the podcast. We look forward to hearing more about diversity, equity, inclusion in the cycling industry over the coming months. As I said, that's it for this episode, but we will soon be back, this time with Peter Eland to talk about lithium battery fires and the e-bike market, risks and responses. Again, we'll start that with a webinar which will take place on the 28th of April at 12:30, and there will be a link to the registration included in the description below. Of course, we'll then follow up that with another podcast. If you do have any questions, please email us at info@bicycleassociation.org.uk. But for now, and from everybody at the Bicycle Association, bye for now.